Hey, Asha, now that the former head of the FBI counterintelligence division in New York has been indicted for working with a Russian oligarch, does that mean the FBI is compromised?
It's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet.
So, Asha, you're going to have to help me understand this recent indictment of Mr. McGonagall. Is that how you say his name?
I've been saying McGonagall.
McGonagall. Okay, so what's going on here? Help us understand. This is a complicated indictment. This one's not straightforward at all.
Yes, so there's actually two indictments. One in New York. There was another one filed the same day in D.C.
Whoa.
Yes.
I only read the New York one.
Yeah,
okay,
there's a whole other one, which is, I think even the DC one is even sketchier than the New York one. So the New York one involves the former head of the counterintelligence division of the New York field office of the FBI, the special agent in charge. So the New York field office has an assistant director in charge of the entire office, but because it is the largest field office, and a couple of other large field offices have an ADIC, and then underneath them they have special agents in charge of the different divisions, as compared to some other field offices that just have a special agent in charge. But anyway, so essentially this, one of the second highest in command of the New York field office, and then overseeing all of counterintelligence, which basically monitors foreign intelligence activity. So the New York indictment alleges that this person, Charlie McGonigal, had basically been involved with another individual to help lift sanctions against Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska is a Russian oligarch, very close with Vladimir Putin, who had been sanctioned by the Treasury Department. He had actually been sanctioned well before Russia invaded Ukraine last year. And essentially, there is a law called the International Economic, it's the IEEPA, and now I'm like forgetting exactly what it stands for.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. Something Economic Powers Act. I'm going to look it up. IEPA is what it's referred to, which allows the president to basically impose sanctions to bar the people from receiving or giving money, to certain business entities or individuals. And Oleg Deripaska is on this list. And the long and short of it is that Charlie McGonigal was receiving payments through a shell company that he sort of bamboozled a friend in New Jersey to receive these payments from a Russian bank, and was receiving payments in violation of Treasury sanctions. So that's that one.
Well, and he was hiding it, right? It was a little shady. Like he's calling him the big guy and like using kind of coded language just to refer to him.
Right. And the key is that, the indictment makes it a point to highlight that as the former head of the counterintelligence division of the FBI, this person was very up to speed on the fact that sanctions were in place, how they worked, right, that this was all prohibited. I mean, he's not just like, a random Joe that ended up working for Deripaska and had no idea that he can't be paid by him or something like that. So there was a lot of deliberate concealment of these payments and the receipt of these payments.
It's really an important point. I mean, I think sometimes your status and your knowledge can make it easier for the government to indict you, right? And it can go towards the actual intent necessary to file criminal charges. I think that's an important point that we've seen in other cases, and people often ask us why you can't charge certain people. This is the counterexample to that, right?
That's right. I mean, he clearly knew. And I mean, I would add there's another layer here, which is that Oleg Deripaska is also connected to Russian intelligence. I mean, in the Russian state, there's really not the kind of divisions that we have between the president and intelligence agencies and business people. I mean, all of these different sectors of Russia essentially funnel up to Vladimir Putin, right? They call it the power vertical. And so all these oligarchs are essentially allowed to keep and stash their money and do what they want to do as long as they're helping Putin with his dirty work, and they're working closely with intelligence agencies. Deripaska may sound familiar to people because he was intimately connected with Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort, prior to going to work for the Trump campaign for free, I believe owed Deripaska something along the lines of, I don't know, $10 million or something like that.
Yeah.
So he owed this Russian oligarch a lot of money, ended up working for the Trump campaign for free. And, that was one of the connections that were kind of problematic. Were leading to this idea that Paul Manafort, through Konstantin Klimnik, was kind of passing information about the campaign back to the Kremlin. Deripaska also surfaced because in another situation involving Mitch McConnell, because Deripaska is I think the owner, or, he basically is behind a big Russian aluminum company called Rusal. And Rusal was, I think, trying to get an aluminum plant or backing an aluminum plant of some kind in Kentucky. And so I think this was in 2019 that Mitch McConnell and Paul Rand were trying to get Treasury sanctions lifted on Rusal, the company, so that this investment could be made. So it's very sketchy. There's stuff all over the place. And Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, was involved with that whole scheme. So he's surfaced in a lot of different areas, which makes it, again, even more damning that the person who was probably the most aware of all of these very problematic aspects of malign influence in various aspects of, American society, and should have been protecting us from it, was actually getting into bed with this person. Now, some of it happened right before he retired. Most of this happened, the Deripaska stuff at least, happened after he retired. But obviously, even after he retired, it was still illegal for him to be knowingly violating U.S. sanctions against a Russian oligarch.
Well, let's talk about this D.C. indictment. I'm taking a look at this now. This also looks very problematic. And I will say it takes a lot of effort to get indicted by the feds in two different jurisdictions at the same time. So pretty impressive effort here by Mr. McGonagall.
And I had a question about that. Are they required to do that because the crimes were taking place in these different jurisdictions? Is there no way to consolidate that?
No, there isn't, because, for example, the false statement counts here in the District of D.C. Indictment occurred in the District of D.C., so you can't indict those anywhere else. So a lot of times, that's why I said it takes some effort. A lot of times what would happen is, let's just say you have a standard case, somebody commits $1 million fraud in Chicago, or somebody is trafficking drugs in New York. And maybe they also traffic drugs in 3 other cities. You'll just charge them in New York, and you'll just put the rest of it in front of the judge at sentencing, and just kind of wrap it all up, and do one indictment. You kind of accomplished what you're supposed to accomplish, which is to get the guy in prison, and the judge will take into account all this other stuff. it really, you have to be someone special to get indicted in a bunch of different places at once. I mean, maybe you're Chapo Guzman, maybe you're R. Kelly, or maybe you're this guy. So, or whoever, Michael Avenatti. You have to crime in multiple areas, and the government has to decide that you're somebody that they really want to make sure they're putting the squeeze on, because he's going to have 2 trials. He's going to have to, deal with both cases. They got two whacks at him. Even if he beats one set of charges, he has the other one. Like, that's not a good situation for him.
By the way, just to close an open loop from the other indictment, I just looked up. It's International Emergency Economic Powers Act. I had forgotten what the first E stands for. IEEPA is what it's known as. The second indictment, I think, is even sketchier than the first, because a lot of it involves things that were taking place while McGonagall was still working for the FBI and in his role as the SAC of the Counterintelligence Division. And I mean, it's a fairly complicated set of facts, but basically he's in touch with foreign nationals. He's meeting with people like the president of Albania. He's initiating investigations in New York against political opponents of the president of Albania, while taking, I think, a total of $225,000 in payments to kind of do work that benefited politically or financially these foreign nationals and government officials, people connected with intelligence, without disclosing it. So in the FBI, you have to disclose any contact you have with foreign nationals. You have to disclose any assets you have over a certain amount of money. You have to disclose your liabilities because you hold a security clearance. And the purpose of these disclosures is to identify whether you might have any vulnerabilities, knowing that, you have been in touch with certain foreign officials, et cetera. It kind of makes it transparent. And so there's no way that these people can kind of hold that over you. If you try to keep it secret, for example. And so really it's trying to ensure that there is transparency. It's part of these disclosures began as part of a law called the Ethics in Government Act of 1978. And he was just lying on these forms left and right. He was basically flying back and forth to Albania, to Austria. I mean, meeting with a head of state of another country and just not disclosing this, and then also accepting payments. And I think most problematically, funneling information, initiating investigations. And in fact, some of these people, or at least one of these people that he was in constant contact with, was an informant for one of these investigations that he opened, and he did not disclose that he had this outside personal relationship with this person. I mean, it's very, very sketchy and bad.
Yeah, I have to say, you said failed to disclose, but, it depends on the way you look at it. I mean, the government spin on it, and I think it's accurate, as well. He was actually making false statements,
Yes.
right? Because he was saying, "Oh, I'm meeting nobody, like, right? I'm not meeting anyone, or I'm right," and this sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it is really, really problematic. It's corrupt. I think it raises the question of how this even happened, how somebody that corrupt could be in that position of authority. I'm sure that's what a lot of our listeners are thinking.
That is the big question. And just quickly to highlight, when you say failure to disclose, I say false statements. I think that's, again, one of these national security versus criminal lenses, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's both, all of the above.
Right.
The false statement is the criminal violation. The failure to disclose is what creates the national security threat. And both of these are in play here. So the charges are for false statements. The failure to disclose really goes to the fact that he was compromised, to use your initial word in your question. The question of how this could happen, I mean, here's the thing. After Robert Hansen was arrested in 2001, I believe, which was, probably the largest intelligence breach in our history. He had been spying for the Soviet Union and then Russia for, I think, over a span on and off of 20 years. The FBI instituted periodic polygraph tests. So people, at least on the national security side, I'm not sure if everyone does, but definitely on the national security side, have to undergo a polygraph every 5 years. And it's specifically to identify people who might be compromised. So I think that in McGonagall's case, I believe that it started a few years before he retired, at least the things in the second indictment. And so it might have been like he might have just skated by after had a polygraph that came out clean and then was doing this. Though, I have to tell you that I don't think people just sort of become corrupt over, they don't just wake up one day and they're like, I'm going to start taking money from, foreign intelligence officers. Like I think you're hardwired that way or you're not, right? Like you have a price or you're not. So I have to wonder what was going on before that. And I also have to wonder why, the polygraph or other mechanisms designed to screen people like this and identify them didn't do that earlier.
Right. I mean, there are crimes I think that arise in certain situations, right? I used to investigate, real estate moguls, right after the real estate crash in 2008. A lot of them were very tight on cash, and they did criminal things. I think that they wouldn't have done if their businesses were doing well, but they just got desperate and things like that. I remember, indicting a guy who was so addicted to crack cocaine that he robbed a lot of banks in a very violent way and terrorized a lot of people. I do think it can be reasons for it, but this sort of thing is just, how do you explain it, right? And with this, the other thing I think comes to mind with somebody this corrupt, who didn't need to be, right? He's not like, in desperate straits. I can't imagine, you have this big time FBI guy, but also how foolish he was to do it this way. That's the other thing that comes to mind, right? Like you'd think he's a super secret spy guy. Isn't that all you counterintelligence people? Aren't you like super, super savvy?
Thank you. That's the other thing. When I was reading the indictment, I didn't understand, like, how did he think he was not going to be caught? That was really strange. Like, even when he's traveling to Albania with this, foreign national that he was not supposed to have contact with, they're flying together. I mean, he flies there. He actually does disclose, he disclosed some things. Like he disclosed unofficial travel to Albania, but that's going to raise the question of, well, who paid for you to stay there? And there's no, in other words, he wasn't actually like being super squirrel secret. You know what I'm saying? Like it was very strange. And
right. That's what was so weird about it.
It's like I was reading it and wondering, like, your friend is going to get this transaction from a Russian bank of several tens of thousands of dollars. Like, that's going to get flagged. Like, someone's going to look at that and then wonder why. I don't even know what that company was. Like, what this construction company in New Jersey is getting, money from a Russian source. Like, it was very strange to me that he thought that this was somehow not going to be detected.
Right. Whereas, like, you mentioned the prior case, and that was actually this like CIA operative who was, working for the Russians and the Soviets for many years. That guy was
FBI. He was FBI.
Or he was FBI. Oh, geez. Mm-hmm. But he was like super clever. Like I remember reading all about it, and I'm like, that guy was like doing all this super secret stuff to like avoid being caught. Right. I mean, like crazy, like living a double life, basically. This guy, nothing like that. So he really looks like he's in a very difficult spot. I mean, his lawyer put out a statement that was pretty, it was pretty telling. It was like, well, we're looking forward to seeing the evidence that they have and evaluating our case or, something like that. It's like, okay, It really is going to be hard. It's very hard to beat both of these at the same time. A jury's not going to like this guy and is going to be very skeptical
Well,
of him.
and I imagine that, the government's going to throw the book at him because as someone who was in a position of trust and especially a position where he was expected to protect national security in the largest field office that is charged with these things, I can imagine that no one's going to have sympathy for him, not the prosecutors, not the jury, not the judge. And so I frankly hope that he spends a lot of time in jail. I'll just add that, the Republicans are jumping on this and saying, because as the head of the New York Counterintelligence Division, McGonagall was actually involved in a number of cases. And I think he was actually quite aggressive in certain counterintelligence investigations, but he did have a hand in the investigation into contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia. And, I just saw a tweet from Dinesh D'Souza before I came on this, like, the person who's been found caught, with Russian spies was, running the investigation into Russian spies. And I was like, I don't think this really helps your case because it sort of proves the point that Russia has really been able to infiltrate our institutions, and it's really strange. Like, I'm not fully understanding the logic of where they're trying to go. I think it's just another kind of word salad
mishmash. I mean, I think it's like, well, they want to prove, Trump told them the FBI's corrupt, and here you go. Here's your proof. Here's your deep state proof that they're corrupt, and maybe they were trying to pin it on Trump because they were the ones who were colluding with Russia, that sort of thing. It's just It's a very easy thing to parody.
Word salad with Russian dressing.
Wow. Yeah, indeed. Wow. Well, I will just flag as well. I mean, you did a really great piece in your Substack on the Hunter Biden misinformation campaign, whatever. And I think this is going to ultimately be something similar, maybe on a smaller scale.
So, Renato, now let's turn the tables and get to the criminal stuff. And it looks like the DA in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is going to be charging Alec Baldwin and another person who worked on the film Rust of involuntary manslaughter for the discharge of a prop weapon on set, which discharged a real bullet that hit one of the production crew, killed her, and injured someone else. And I know you've been following that case, and maybe you can unpack it for us. I think it's 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter is what the charges are going to be.
Yeah, and that is really complicated. As I learned, I spent a lot of time studying New Mexico law this past week, and it's because it's very, very confusing. So involuntary manslaughter, traditionally in New Mexico law, I read a lot of case law there, required sort of a criminal recklessness, that you actually had to have kind of a wanton disregard for human life, sort of you essentially were not it was more than just negligence. So negligence is where like you're acting in a way that a prudent person wouldn't act. Maybe you're texting while you drive or something like that. Whereas the sort of wanton disregard for human life is, the example used in New Mexico courts is like you're driving the wrong way in the road, like you're driving the wrong lane, like against traffic up a hill, so you can't see who's on the other side, so you just don't care. Like if you hit somebody and kill them. So that's usually what's required. But the New Mexico Court of Appeals, in a very important case in New Mexico law, decided that actually just if the underlying issue is misuse of a firearm, you can just the prosecutor can essentially get by with just regular negligence, which is a real problem for Alec Baldwin. Like, that creates a risk for him, because I think that's a very odd criminal statute, a very odd interpretation, I should say, of a criminal statute, because it's not the way I would read the text of their criminal statutes, and it's also not the way ordinarily that criminal statutes work. Like, I always tell my clients, I'm usually telling them, like, hey, you don't commit crimes by accident. It's not like you slip and fall and go criming. Like, that's not how it works. Like, the government's not going to convict you of committing fraud by tripping and falling.
So yeah, can you unpack that a little bit? So I watched an interview with the DA, and I think this is what you're talking about. She said there's two avenues to involuntary manslaughter. There's the first one that you just talked about, which I kind of understood for her to say that Alec Baldwin and these other people on the set had an affirmative duty of care to kind of take certain steps before they handled these weapons. Like you said, they didn't just they had more than kind of just reasonable care. They had certain due diligence sort of duty, and she thinks they failed in that. And every person didn't do their job, basically. Then she says there's this other avenue to involuntary manslaughter, which is a misdemeanor, and it's the negligent handling of a weapon. Is that what you're saying? But what does she mean by that?
It's complicated. So the negligent handling of a weapon is a misdemeanor, true. But it actually merges under New Mexico law with a felony, and it will be a felony under this, I think, very questionable decision. And it doesn't have a mandatory minimum, so who knows what prison time you would get for it. But just pure negligence of in the handling of the weapon can lead to a felony involuntary manslaughter.
So if it leads to death, then it can become
involuntary manslaughter.
Got it.
Because it's the unlawful use of a weapon, which is the mishandling in connection with a death.
I see. Okay.
But it's very, as I said, very sketch, because that's not usually why people are convicted of felonies.
Has anyone ever been convicted that way?
Yeah, in fact, there's a leading case on it. If you go to my Twitter feed, you could find it, because I was tweeting out for New Mexico lawyers to help me understand it, because it was just so bizarre. But after spending time, looking into it, there's a New Mexico case where there was a discharge of a firearm. There was a difference in facts about, between the prosecution and the defense about how exactly this happened, but it was, essentially an accidental discharge, very similar to the situation. And the defense is like, hey, you need this higher level of negligence, or you need like this wanton disregard for human life. And New Mexico Court of Appeals is like, no, because this is an unlawful use of a weapon. So you just need the regular negligence. The weird thing, though, Asha, is it's like a self-referential, right? Because the unlawful use, what makes it unlawful, it's not. When I looked at the statute, I thought, well, these are people who are like, like hoodlums versus people who have like an FOID card, or they're authorized to carry the weapon, versus some street gang that has stolen guns. But no, what the Court of Appeals says is, well, the negligent mishandling is itself illegal, and so that does it.
Wow!
So it really puts him in a very tough spot, because the wanton charge, to abbreviate it in a weird way, has a 5-year mandatory minimum. So that's a massive hammer. And so Baldwin is in this situation. This is, I think, unfair by the prosecutor. And that would be my read on it. What the prosecutor's overcharging this, and what she does, she's taking advantage of, is two things. One is you have one statute that's got such a low burden of proof that she might just win it. You never know, right? Even though it's like an iffy case, like she just may win that. The other count is a 5-year mandatory minimum. So if you're Alec Baldwin, you got to be thinking like, oh my God, even if there's a 5% chance that I could lose on that, like that's serious business. You have to think about a guilty plea. It doesn't look like he is, but a lot of defendants would in this circumstance.
I thought I heard the prosecutor say, though, that there are alternative charges, meaning that he would only get sentenced for one.
Well,
did I misunderstand?
I don't that I don't. I think that was for the misdemeanor one. I thought that was for the misdemeanor, but in any event, if let's say he just gets one or the other, let's say you're going to trial and you're rolling the dice, it puts him in a situation where the downside is untenable, right? A 5-year mandatory minimum is got to be insane for him to think about 5 years in prison. And on the flip side, the standard of proof is very mushy for him there, right? Because while I don't think a lot of jurors are going to find that he had this just utter disregard for human life,
he was careless.
He was careless. And so, but the question is, was he careless enough to send him to prison as a felon or something? Like, I don't know. So that's complicated. I will say that I think, first of all, I think he's probably got the upper hand in just on the facts. And I will say that, I also saw some interviews from the same DA you did. She seems awfully eager to be on television talking about this. And she's commenting about her thought process and why she wanted to charge him. It just seemed like very poor judgment to me.
So it sounds, if I've been following your comments correctly, I think you think that everybody involved has been unwise in their comments, because I think you also thought that Alec Baldwin should have kept his mouth shut too.
Yeah. So Alec Baldwin went on podcasts, TV shows. He did a George Stephanopoulos interview, and he made all sorts of statements about this because he was concerned about, his reputation. And I think some of those are going to come back to haunt them in this trial. I mean, for example, he claimed that he never pressed the trigger. And the DA made a big point about that, saying that they are going to have some expert who's going to go in and say the gun would have never fired if he didn't press the trigger. So why he put himself in that box, I don't know. It's the sort of thing, I mean, do people under investigation do stupid things? Sure. Sometimes if I'm representing one of them, I'm just scratching my head, but this is a real problem for him. And I think that she, that was a gift that perhaps made it easier for her to make this choice. Supposedly she alluded to communications, which I don't think we have publicly, but that's the other potential one here. I mean, there are certainly the other person who's charged, the armorer, who was supposed to make sure that there was not real bullets in here. She made some really foolish statements on video. I mean, to be fair to her, she was shocked and obviously very concerned, but she talked about her own liability in the minutes after the death and was like, oh my God, Alec's going to sue me and this and that. Who knows what other communications the DA is referring to, maybe text messages or other things that could be incriminating.
Yeah. And I think, beyond the legal stuff, I don't understand why there were real bullets anywhere. That's
a mystery. And the DA claims that they've not figured that out. I mean, that's something you would think that they would.
Like, it just seems like this is a movie set. There's no reason for there to be actual bullets. And I don't know what the procurement process is for weapons on a movie set, but it just feels like there's some place way downstream where this is intended for a movie set. Like, there's no reason for it to ever kind of travel through that chain accompanied by or loaded with actual weapons.
Yeah.
With actual bullets.
It's a great question. I actually think a more interesting trial and a more interesting question would be sort of the liability that, producers like him, he was a lesser sort of role, but producers had in terms of, on the civil side, which has already been settled. She's already gotten the victim's estate has already gotten its money. But, what responsibility they had here. Because it's a criminal case, the DA is very narrowly focused. So the criminal case is just like, did he, fail to check? The DA is claiming that he, by failing to check that the bullets were not, were not real, and by, firing at her without, by pointing it at her without checking that is itself negligent, without all of the stuff of like, why did these get there? How did these get there? Were there proper controls?
Did he admit that he didn't check the gun?
Yes. I mean, kind of. I mean, he said it in a self-serving way, but what he basically said is, I relied on what others were telling. I was told this was fine. I was told to fire it. I mean, the other thing that I have to say, okay, now I'm not a Hollywood or movie person at all, but couldn't he have moved? I mean, wouldn't it be just good for everyone's sake to always aim like 5 inches away from the person? Like, do you really need to aim like right at them? Like, go to the camera? No. Or like pick up, like, I'm not aiming at Asha's head. I'm actually aiming like 5 inches the other way. Like, couldn't they just, for safety's sake, like never quite aim directly at the person? I don't know. Just the thought.
Or maybe like, I mean, I'm sure you can control like cameras like without having to stand right behind them, but maybe for that particular
right
10
for
seconds,
shot,
like just like get people cleared out of the way, like so that they're not downrange of the weapon.
Seriously, it's crazy. I mean, it just seems like such a needless death.
Yeah.
I will say the jury is not going to be happy that this woman died, and you could imagine a set of jurors who want to make some sort of statement. So, very difficult problem for Mr. Baldwin. I think it's a useful window. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're intrigued by it, I mean, what I will say is it's a window into prosecutorial discretion and how things are charged. And you could imagine this charged differently. Like, you could imagine just the lesser, like you could imagine just one charge or the other, or neither. Or some other resolution. I mean, they could have given Mr. Baldwin the opportunity to plead to that misdemeanor in exchange for doing some things to help the community or to help the victim or something along those lines, but they didn't go that route.
So speaking of prosecutorial discretion, I'm giving a talk at McGill University on Thursday, a lecture about how to reconcile the executive accountability with prosecutorial independence.
Wow.
It's actually been really fun to put together, but I'm combining that with a college visit for my son. So he's going to come up with
going to Canada for college?
Well, I'm actually encouraging him to look outside of the United States for college. So we're going to look at McGill. I'm encouraging him to look at St. Andrews in Scotland and Trinity College in Ireland.
Wow.
Maybe some schools in Great Britain, but those are typically 3-year programs, and I don't know. I like 4 years. I don't know, at that stage of your life, I think 4 years is good. But for 2 reasons. Number one, it turns out actually that while these international schools are not exactly cheap, they are cheaper than the schools here.
There's an ulterior motive.
And then the other is, I don't know where we're headed, and there's a part of me that's like, maybe I can start the chain migration,
To like Ireland.
Yeah, exactly. Like, get in there, he can find, a nice Irish partner and then sponsor me. And, when things get too bad, and just kind of flee.
Wow. That's amazing. I've had friends like encourage their kids to like look at state schools. They're like, have you seen the, Arizona State University scholarship program or whatever? But this is the first where I've never met anybody who's like, you know what? I really want my kid to go overseas because they're cheaper. And because maybe they can get
because we might end up in a civil war. So, well, and just to be clear, on the other end of the spectrum, he's also looking at service academies.
Whoa,
in which case
that's
we're
super other end.
I know it's totally other end. And so, as a mom, like, I would love for him to go. My boyfriend went to the Naval Academy. My son's dad went to the Air Force Academy. So and my dad was in the military. I'm very pro-military, but again, looking ahead, looks kind of bleak, I don't know. Are we going to have a war with China? Like, are we, I mean, it's not. I've been encouraging him to think about Space Force.
Oh, okay. Because that's not, because they don't. They, what do they just do? Like they just like.
I'm sure it's
all
computer. I think
so. Wow.
So that's where we are on the whole college thing, and then everything in between. It's kind of, when you get to that point, you have a stepdaughter, right?
Yeah, I don't think she's going to be looking at the Space Force. But that's great. I think it'll be much more mundane. I did not consider like, hey, how about you go as far away from here as possible, and go to Ireland or something.
Well,
I didn't consider that.
I actually was looking at University of New Zealand. But then I thought that might be even too far for me because I obviously want to be able to see him. But I think that'd be cool, actually,
Sure. I have a client who lives in New Zealand. It's fun, but that's a fun place. It's like very idyllic, right? It's like Lord of the Rings was filmed
beautiful.
there. But man, that's pretty far away. I don't know.
Far.
It's like you want to send your son off. It's like, you don't like him or something?
I love him. I know. But I also, I will say, like, this gives me a reason to go to Europe, or I mean, Canada is Canada, but but Australia, I mean, New Zealand and Australia are kind of far, so I don't know that I can fully contemplate schools there right now.
Wow. So, but he's more into service academies because that's his idea. That wasn't your idea.
His idea was service academies. My idea is.
Don't you have to get like your member of Congress to sponsor you?
Yeah, it's a very it's a very complicated process. You do have to get a member of Congress to nominate you.
Okay.
And so I haven't fully, I haven't investigated exactly how that whole process works. We're just right now trying to look at schools, prepare for the test, take AP tests, things like that. So he's still a junior.
Okay. He's got time.
Yeah.
Wow. I never considered either of those options. I only looked at U.S. schools. But then again, whatever. I didn't have a mom who was, flying around and giving speeches at other universities and doing all that fancy stuff. So good for you. Well, good. That'll be fun. Maybe next time we can talk about something else. We got Valentine's Day coming up, right?
Yeah, I know. You weren't ready to talk about that today.
I was not. Here's a peek behind the curtain. Asha's like, oh, I've been making all my Valentine's Day plans. And I'm like, girl, it's 3 weeks before Valentine's Day. I have not thought about that. I just got off the red eye today. I have not been thinking about Valentine's Day. So we'll figure that out next week.
MSW Media.